I hope you'll indulge my asking a very bizarre question.
There it is! There it is!
Hello. This video is 1.5 hours of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure trivia. It is the final part of a long-running series of videos on this channel where I talk about JoJo trivia. If you want to see the other videos before this one or after this one, then you can check out the link in the description below to watch more. Anyway, without further ado, JoJo.
Heaven ascended. You heard right. By now, you have attained heaven. You've gone so deep into the pit of obscure anime trivia that you have effectively become your final form. You aren't just a JoJo fan, you're the JoJo fan. So without further ado, let's continue to go even further beyond. Araki's bug bite fetish.
Ooh boy, can't wait to talk about this one!
I love my job!
In a set of questions posed to Araki and Uomo in October of 2018, they rather candidly ask what his fetish is, or if he even has one at all. And unsurprisingly, like the absolute mad lad that we all know he is, Araki actually answers fairly explicitly. The balls on this man, I love him so much. And just as he had done with all of his interests before, he had actually already incorporated this aspect of himself into JoJo. In Part 7, Steel Ball Run, a scene exists where Johnny and Gyro exchange secrets with one another. Johnny's confession, and the far more strange of the two, is that he reveals that he has an insect bite fetish, specifically for when he sees women who have been bitten by mosquitoes on their arms or legs. What? You want me to make a comment on this? How the fuck am I supposed to comment? In the interview, Araki revealed that this information doesn't just apply to Johnny, but to himself as well. Yeah. He goes on to further explain in this direct quote. Your skin swells red when a mosquito bites you, right? I like to push in my nails on the spot to make an X mark. It's quite erotic too. Haha. What the fuck? Manga in Theory and Practice and its strange cover art. In 2015, Araki released a book entitled Manga in Theory and Practice, a collection of techniques and general tips used for creating manga or writing stories. I've read through quite a bit of it at this point, and his methodology is really fascinating and captivating to learn about. Even so, I won't be diving into them here, because instead of talking about the enthralling concepts within the book, I instead want to talk about the front cover. I have no idea what I'm supposed to do with this information, but the cover for Manga in Theory and Practice heavily references a Brazilian flag. Yeah. This was first pointed out to me on Twitter by user @KiroSunflower. And since then, I haven't been able to find anybody else talking about it, so I guess I'll fill that role. The design of the flag, featuring a large star on a handle surrounded by a sort of ornamental looking wreath, is almost exactly traced for the cover design of Araki's novel. The only clear difference between the two is color, and the circle in the center of the star bearing the book's title rather than the globe of Brazil's flag. A bit of a strange choice of inspiration there, Araki. I have no concept what the thought process behind this decision could have been, but knowing him, it was probably because he thought it looked cool and literally nothing else. Next up, we have another guest entry narrated by my friend Gerber about the 2005 April Fools Steel Ball Run anime announcement. Take it away, dude.
During the serialization of Part 7, Steel Ball Run, an internet artist named Totome made a fake OVA announcement for Steel Ball Run, utilizing model sheets from the 1993 Stardust Crusaders OVA to do so. This was devised as part of an elaborate April Fool's prank with actually impressively rendered art of Gyro Zappelli in the OVA art style. This is the first known instance on the internet of a fake JoJo anime announcement, with of course many to come in the following years. A trendsetter of sorts. So before you make another joke about Jolyne.jpg, be sure to pay your respects to the JPEG that started it all.
Lisa's puffy nipples. What the fuck? On the chapter cover of chapter 97 in the middle of part 2 Battle Tendency, the character Lisa has strangely prominent nipples underneath her sweater. While the turtleneck she's wearing in the illustration is almost certainly a reference to the band Devo, the significance of this little detail escapes me. I don't know, maybe Araki was like down bad that week, I don't know. Or maybe they could be just really big bug bites. We all know how much he likes those. Couture Issue Girl. In the Part 5 manga, during the fight between Bucciolati and Sekko punches a fashion poster from Couture Issue, having mistaken the woman in the poster for Bruno himself because of their similar hairstyles. This poster also appears in the PS2 game, as well as Eyes of Heaven as a small background texture. It even ended up making it into the anime adaptation in a very brief blink and you'll miss it scene. So next time you watch the show with friends, be sure to point at the screen and say, oh my gosh, it's the Couture Issue girl from the JoJo Iceberg that I watched from Salty D Gaiden. Who am I kidding? You probably don't have friends if you've gotten this far. RoStar Hat. The RoStar Hat was a formerly obtainable but now unavailable user-generated hat published in the avatar shop of hit social game Roblox. Yes, finally, my subscribers can rejoice. I'm finally acknowledging Roblox. Yippee! The item was created by a user named Reverse Polarity on September 9th of 2019. The hat, obviously inspired by Jotaro Kujo's hat from Stardust Crusaders, also contained an even more blatant reference to JoJo itself in the item description. I did it. You all wanted it, so I did it. Good grief. Which is obviously a reference to Jotaro's signature catchphrase, Yere Yere Deze, as it's often translated into English. The name RoStar is also obviously a play on Roblox and Joestar. Unfortunately though, it seems as though there's a real-life company with this name, thus likely leading to the item's deletion from their site. Trying to open the RBXMX file for the hat in Roblox Studio now leads to it loading as an invisible model named Dragon Shades, likely used as a placeholder asset that Roblox overrode the original hat with to prevent it from being used. Before its deletion from the game, as of September 26th of 2020, the item was favorited on Roblox 2,877 times. Bengus Heritage for the Future art. Okay, narration challenge. If I can get through this entire entry without laughing once, I win. Okay, ready, go. Bengus... Fuck. Okay, starting over. Bengus is a Japanese freelance illustrator, a character designer, and game creator, who is well known for his work at Capcom in the company's early days. He was a main designer there, having worked for the Street Fighter series, the Darkstalker series, Plasma Sword, Power Stone, Onimusha, and others. He apparently grew up discovering his passion for art by copying illustrations done by Leiji Matsumoto and Akira Toriyama, before going on to join Capcom in 1992, utilizing his, as he calls it, counterproductive style of conceiving his artwork, sketching and coloring it all in one shot. He's gone by many different pen names over the years, including Maido Shito, CRMK, Holy Home Run, and most recently, Gouda Cheese. Fuck! And considering his consistent work on Capcom projects, you'd be correct if you suspected that he had a hand in the artwork for the JoJo arcade game Heritage for the Future, as he was the person that drew the original character art for a pamphlet included with the arcade board itself, featuring characters such as Mariah, Vanilla Ice, Pet Shop, and Whole Horse. Anasui is Trish's lost brother. With parts 5 and 6 of JoJo taking place approximately 10 years apart from each other, it was determined that a 15-year-old Trish Una and a 25-year-old Narciso Anasui would actually be about the same age as one another. Given this fact, a headcanon rose among JoJo fans that, similarly to Trish, Anasui was a bastard child of Diavolo's who somehow escaped his notice. Given Anasui's likeness to Diavolo himself, and to some extent his early feminine appearance looking somewhat similar to Trish, this theory is posed to explain the visual similarities between the two, and their supposedly shared father. Of course, this is all just speculation, and Araki has never commented on the idea himself, probably never even meaning for that to be the case. Still though, given the compatibility of canon facts with these musings, it can be somewhat fun to imagine that this could be the case. To be honest though, I think that for the most part, people assume that all three of these characters are related because they have pink hair. Which I mean, like, yeah, I can understand, but I feel like not enough people fully comprehend that JoJo doesn't have canon color schemes for its characters. For the anime and colored manga, they need to pick some defined palettes for consistency, but in the case of the source material, Araki has been quite clear that he never likes to pick specific colors. And every time that he has to colorize his own work, there are various differences between two drawings of the same character. This is actually why the anime has made the choice to shift the hues of the characters and settings during certain scenes. Not only does the change in color help to highlight key moments, but it also references this variation of Araki's work in a much more tangible way. So an aspect like color linking these three characters together isn't really as strong of a connection as people might think. King Crimson is Part 8 Josuke's true stand. This is an old theory that posits that since the Higashikata's family stands in Part 8 all have the word king in their name, that the final form of Josuke's stand, Soft and Wet, would turn out to be named King Crimson, the name of Diavolo's stand from Part 5. Seeing as Jolyne has now ended though, this seems to not be the case. Unless, you know, Josuke comes back in Part 9 for some reason and his stand evolves into King Crimson, but I don't really think that that's gonna happen. I think that this theory is dead in the water. But for the time, this theory, ooh, it was spicy, and honestly, I could have seen it happening at some point. Buichi Terasawa. Buichi Terasawa is a famous manga artist who's well known for his original manga series, Cobra. It's a story about an adventurous man of the same name who surgically alters his face and erases his memories to eventually hide from his foes and settle down. Of course, he proceeds to regain his memories, reunite with his former partner, and jump back into the fray of adventure. In a story that takes inspiration from European spaghetti westerns, samurai stories, and film conventions ranging from that of James Bond to Disney animation. The series was collected into 18 volumes running in Shonen Jump from November 1978 to 1984. There were many sequel mangas, one-shots, films, 2 anime television series, 2 OVAs, audio albums, video games, and plenty of other tie-in merchandise. The reason that this is relevant is that apparently Terasawa's name is actually the inspiration behind the mysterious initials in the title of Araki's other series, Cool Shock BT, with the BT standing for, who else, Buichi Terasawa. Also, Buichi's character Cobra served as an inspiration for the character of Whole Horse, who you can definitely see some aesthetic similarities in, if you squint a little bit. Steel Ball Run VOMIC Chapter Voiceovers. Hey, not to ruin the immersion of this Iceberg video, but I'm actually recording this a bit later because I messed up during the scripting process and got this entry completely wrong. So apologies if my mic quality is a bit different. Can't do anything about that. Got a new mic. Anyway, so the Steel Ball Run VOMIC Chapter Voiceovers. These are just a brief collection of officially voiced over chapters of Steel Ball Run to help promote the official release. The reason that they're called VOMICs is probably what you're thinking. They are voiced comics. They're actually really cool and were made before Steel Ball Run characters got into the JoJo video games with official voice actors, so these are some of the first voiced interpretations of these characters. With all that being said, don't get excited for an entirely voiced manga from beginning to end. Like I said, this was really only made for promotion, so it only covers a couple bits of the beginning parts. And when I say bits, I mean bits. It actually skips over a couple of early chapters and hops around a bit. It's kind of weird. Nonetheless though, I'm actually really happy that this exists in the first place. I really enjoy when manga publishers make voiced over comics like this. They actually did this with a recent Shonen Jump title, Kagurabachi. The first couple of chapters got official voiceovers with English subtitles, so you can actually go check them out right now online. Sorry if I'm randomly promoting Kagurabachi, but you should really be reading Kagurabachi. Shout out to the Bachi Bros. Kajipon's JoJo Posing School. Since all the way back in the ancient times of 2002, a group led by a JoJo fan named Kajipon has been traveling the world with events throughout Japan and the USA to teach people about the finer things in life. Now, you might ask what those finer things in life are. Maybe some culinary skills? Acting chops? Improv practice? If you guessed any of the following, you are absolutely incorrect. Especially not the improv thing. You should go to hell for even suggesting that. The true answer, of course, is how to imitate the iconic poses found within JoJo. Yes, in an attempt to help people enrich their lives, these lovely folks won't cease until every open ear they come across is made aware of the sweet, sweet nectar of dopamine that is throwing your arms into weirdly impossible positions and just fucking owning it. Even if that might only be true a little less than half of the time. Because seriously, what was Polnareff doing that one time where he was like, his leg was contorted back? I don't know how you do this. People have done it, I just don't know how. It's possible, but do I have to defy the laws of physics to get it to work? Megaton Man. Listen, I know, you've heard all of the Dwang jokes, sure. But did you know that there's actually another infamously bad bootleg translation of JoJo out there? Yeah, it's called Megaton Man, and it's something of a meme among Korean fans of JoJo. This version of the series evidently came to be because at the time Korea and Japan did not have diplomatic ties. And so, because of this, many pirated Japanese manga made their way into Korea through less than proper publication channels. Megaton Man itself actually became a meme mostly for its, in retrospect, apparently super weird translation choices of its source material, and because of its meme status, there are actually even fan Korean subtitles for the JoJo anime based on the script of Megaton Man. Since I don't actually speak Korean, it's obviously a bit hard for me to tell just how funny it actually is, but if it has anything even close to the line of "it gives me a feeling so complicated," then yeah, I'd probably say it's pretty funny. Araki's childhood trauma. If you've read a lot of JoJo like I have, Araki's work has many recurring themes that make us question things about his life. If for whatever reason he just hates all dogs, what his deal with bugs is. But one that's actually pretty easy to draw a line of connection to is Araki's seeming obsession with boys nearly drowning. We actually know about this thanks to Kajipon from the previous entry. He was actually pretty keen on making fans aware that Araki himself, as a child, actually nearly drowned to death, and that the experience must have left something of an impression on poor young Araki, as all of his works since this incident have featured chipper boys nearly inhaling enough water to die of it. Of the many examples of this in his library, a few notable ones would be Ikoro from Bao, Pierre from Rohan at the Louvre, Josefumi, and of course, Jonathan Joestar himself. Alright, up next we have the final guest entry narrated by the Syperior. It's about the Jolyne Fly High with Gucci official translation. Take it away, dude.
When the promotional comic Jolyne Fly High with Gucci was released, the official Facebook page for Gucci itself posted a link to an English translation of it. The link was only available for about a week before its deletion. Despite the somewhat low quality, the translation is complete, which begs the question of whether a physical release similar to that of Rohan at the Louvre was ever planned, but unless Gucci ever speaks up about this, we'll presumably never know.
Yukako in GANTZ. A panel of Yukako from Part 4, specifically from the story arc Yukako Yamagishi Dreams of Cinderella, was featured on the album cover of Breeze Girl by the group Baseball Bear. That in and of itself is interesting on its own, but a billboard which was promoting the album in Japan was coincidentally featured in the background recreation of said location used in the final chapter of the hit seinen manga GANTZ by Hiroya Oku. Okay, so does this technically mean that JoJo itself is canonically a manga that exists in the world of GANTZ? Well, it would hardly be the most screwed up thing to exist in GANTZ, that's for sure, but that's a whole other plate of cookies for a different glass of milk. Fujoshi Interview. You know, strange interviews seem to be par for the course when it comes to Araki. It seems like every time he comes out of his art cave, he just talks to the most strange people. But the one that we're talking about for this entry, this one's special. This interview, referred to commonly as the Fujoshi Interview, is one conducted between Araki and Junko Kaneda in the November 26, 2007 issue of Eureka magazine. The reason that this is intriguing is that Kaneda herself is referred to often as a veteran Fujoshi, which, if you're unfamiliar with the term, refers to women who are basically otaku for primarily boy love content. Now, this doesn't just mean that they're fans of MLM romance, of course. That on its own isn't really anything particularly noteworthy. What crosses into the realm of a Fujoshi is a person who generally seems almost chronically unable to engage with anything, any story, any character relationship, without in some way cycling back to being obsessed with any pairing of men that so much as breathe toward one another. So, fucking yikes? The term Fujoshi, when translated from Japanese, somewhat concerningly means rotten girl. Which, yeah, okay, clearly they're concerned with women liking gay pairings for the wrong reason, but what they should be concerned about is just how weird this lady acts. The Fujoshi Interview is notoriously bad, as basically all of her questions for Araki seem to tip the scale in the direction of her strange, crude fanfiction and fetishization the entire time. Araki remains polite, but clearly seems to try steering away from the stranger interjections. For example, towards the beginning of the interview, she notes the camaraderie between Josuke and Jotaro, who, you know, are just kinda related biologically. Kaneda then goes on to say, and this is a direct quote, "It's an exceedingly good relationship. Even one that almost crosses a certain line." Ha 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 ha. And again, being the Chad he is, Araki promptly and uncomfortably responds, maybe it's better that I didn't write that then. And regardless of any sort of comfort or social cues, she just keeps pressing it, and then goes on to imply that after that hunt, the two would go to a love hotel, before of course swerving into the idea that many of course would object to the relationship, but not because it's creepy and weird and incest. She clarifies that it's because Jotaro is meant for kakyoin only. You know, of course. Araki struggles to respond in a way that makes him sound even remotely interested, but he gets back into it for a bit when he's allowed to talk about the characterization in Steel Ball Run. Sadly though, Kaneda derails yet again, saying that she thinks Diego should spice up Johnny and Gyro's dynamic with a love triangle, before then going into Dio and Pucci sex fantasies, because of fucking course. Araki is noticeably off-put by the sudden huge shift in topic like any normal person, but does use it as a chance to reconfirm Dio's bisexuality as a matter of clarity. And while I might think that this is really cool, this encouragement lets Kaneda prod him about his supposed attraction to Jonathan, which Araki humors, but ultimately refrains from commenting on. Araki ends off the interview basically saying that Dio never sincerely loved anyone, and that's because he just couldn't, and that he perhaps would have been able to change in the future had he not died. But he did very much die, so there's that. Thankfully though, the interview pitters out before Kaneda can get a discussion about part 5 off the ground, and thank Christ, because I didn't want to read about it. Lost Yahoo Phantom Blood movie trailer. None of those words are in the Bible. Well, actually, maybe lost is. I should have thought that joke through. That made no sense. If you think it already sucks that the Phantom Blood movie is lost media, well, let me do you another, because apparently an exclusive trailer for the movie is lost as well. Yeah, a lost trailer for a lost movie. How about that shit? It was posted to Yahoo Japan on February 23rd, 2007, several days after the movie's release in theaters. As you can imagine, based on context clues, the page containing the trailer is no longer accessible, but it can still be viewed using the Wayback Machine, as several aspects of it were thankfully archived. The trailer itself, though, not so much. It's believed that this special video contained more footage and screen caps of the film that we have yet to see, but probably not a crazy amount, to be honest. Many trailers tend to reuse the same scenes across multiple advertisements, so I assume it'd be the same case here regardless of any exclusivity. Remote romance. Remote! Romance! That's the song that it's associated with. Anyway, here's a stand that you may have never heard of before, Remote Romance. Now, of course, the reason you probably haven't heard of it before is because it actually doesn't really belong to any specific JoJo part. No. This stand was created for and is now canon to the real world. That's right, to celebrate the 25th anniversary of JoJo, a special event was held called JoJo Exhibition 2012. It was a pop-up art gallery where Hirohiko Araki presented various art pieces he's created over the years, from his beginnings in the manga industry to his most famous works. The various rooms that were a part of the exhibition represented the numerous eras of his career, and were presented in chronological order, so guests in attendance could walk through a physical representation of his life's work. They even had some impressive life-size sculptures and even a giant manga volume of Phantom Blood. I want it so bad. You can tell that this whole event was a JoJo fan's wet dream, and anyone who had the pleasure of attending probably had a great time. Although, what about the people who were less fortunate? What about people who wanted to go see it in person, but weren't given the proper chance? Well, that's where remote romance comes in. Given the population of folks who weren't able to secure tickets, the event partnered with Google to live stream the exhibition over the internet. Although instead of a normal live stream, Araki decided to have some fun and put his own bizarre twist on it. For the purposes of this event, he created the stand Remote Romance. This special stand not only physically existed in real life, but its ability was to possess humans who have access to a special server and then give them the ability to project their presence to a remote location. That location being the art gallery itself. All of this is just to say that Remote Romance was their own creative way of live streaming the event while still trying to engage the people who had to stay home. The people who got the opportunity to use it were actually able to control its position in the gallery via Google Hangouts, and it's really cool. It's a fascinating idea and concept, but of course Araki didn't just want to stop there. He would go on to not only create unique artwork for it, but also give it proper battle stats and even an in-depth lore to justify its own existence. According to Araki, the original user of the stand was a legendary hacker that went by the name Dixie Flatline. While Dixie ended up being sentenced to death in 2006, Remote Romance still continued to exist despite the loss of its user. The stand would then become automated, connected to the network that Dixie had used, with anyone who had access to it being able to take over the stand for themselves. What I especially love about this stand, beyond the fact that it was a physical entity that actually existed at one point, is the fact that I'm pretty sure it was a guy in a suit with a camera glued to his head. At first I thought it was like an automatic robot type of deal that would just wheel around the rooms of the exhibition, but not only was Remote Romance online only during specific particular times of the day, but I've actually found pictures of it using its hands to pick things up and articulate its body and joints in very specific ways. Well, I mean, either it's a guy in a suit or it's an actual real-life stand. Also, I found this picture from the exhibition that has a real-life version of the puppet that the warden uses in part 6. You know, Charlotte. And damn, I wish that was actual merch. I'd buy the hell out of that. I want one so bad. Anyway, boop-a-doop. Unreleased Gorgeous Irene doll. Okay, so we haven't really covered it thus far, but I figured I should just bring it up now. Gorgeous Irene was a 2-chapter manga written and illustrated by Araki in 1985, 2 years before the start of JJBA. It follows the adventures of a young girl named Irene Rapona, who has a second life as an assassin known for her makeup skills. And just in case you're concerned about it, it does in fact include wacky poses. Yes, okay, yeah, that is insanely wacky. That is bizarre. Bizarre adventure! It's pretty cool because Irene's name would later go on to be referenced and reused in JoJo. But for the sake of potential spoilers, I don't want to talk about that as a part of this entry. But what I do want to talk about is a potentially cancelled Gorgeous Irene model that was supposedly going to release in 2016. The toy company Sentinel, which has had a history of making a wide offering of JoJo-centric products, showed off that they were developing a Gorgeous Irene doll at Wonderfest 2015. It even would have included multiple sets of clothing and different accessories as well. This product that was previewed, however, would never go on to release, with seemingly no news as to why. And if you're wondering why I'm talking about Gorgeous Irene on the JoJo Iceberg, shut the hell up, bitch. I do what I want. You can't see it, but I'm flipping you off right now. Araki planned to end the series at part 3. Yes, despite JoJo being super well known for its wide variety of stories and arcs, the series was actually planned to end by the completion of Stardust Crusaders. From the very beginning of part 1, Araki had always intended for the series to be split into 3 distinct parts, ending with one final battle against Dio. In an interview with Kappa magazine, he explains how he liked the idea of having a series that moved through different time periods, without involving any sort of time travel. So he settled on the idea of swapping out cast members and protagonists for each of the 3 parts. He would also choose this approach because, in his own words, he didn't want to get trapped in having to draw the same characters over and over again for years upon years. The idea of progressing through different historical periods with new characters in each story was something that greatly appealed to him. But even so, editors at the time weren't super keen on the idea, thinking that the revolving cast might lead to fan outcry if the series ever turned out to be popular. Regardless of this, however, Araki insisted that he take this approach, and eventually, by the time Part 3 was published, the series had already cemented itself as one of Shonen Jump's best. Of course, as we know later, Araki would then proceed to alter his original plan, and continue the series long past its original goalpost. And may I just say, thank Christ he did, because if he hadn't changed his mind, we would never have gotten the peak fiction that is Diamond is Unbreakable. Weekly Shonen Jump Part 6 announcement website. There used to be a website for Part 6 when it was originally being published in Shonen Jump. While the domain was formerly used to promote the art book JoJo A Go-Go, Stone Ocean took over the page when it officially started. I'll be candid here, there isn't much to talk about this topic other than that, but it is noteworthy to mention that it is one of the earliest known official JoJo related websites. GrandGuerrilla. At this point in our journey, we've gotten so deep into this iceberg that we are reaching a point of insanity. A point that is self-referential in nature. A point where this next entry is one that documents a fact about this video in and of itself. Yeah, that's correct. We are at a point where this video is now going to talk about this video. Because if you can believe it, the thumbnail art itself has a direct connection to JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. And no, it's not because the thumbnails have art of JoJo characters. That's a super freaking obvious connection to make, and if I see you doing that in the comments and being cheeky about it, I'm going to kill you. What if I told you that the person that I commissioned to work on this art for these thumbnails all the way back when I first started working on this Iceberg would actually eventually end up working on the JoJo anime itself? Yeah, the artist for these thumbnails is the one and only GrandGuerrilla. And as fate would have it, you've most likely seen his art floating around online. Especially if you're anything like me and you find yourself engrossed in fan-created JoJo content at all times. My Twitter and TikTok feeds are just JoJo and One Piece. The algorithm knows where I live and what I do. Now, much like myself, Grand wasn't really much of a fan of anime until he found out about JoJo back in 2017. Ever since then, he's had a serious dedication to the series, even learning how to emulate and reproduce the style of it in his spare time. His work is incredibly impressive, but if you already have functioning eyeballs, you could probably already tell. It's practically indistinguishable from the official product. It's one of the reasons I ended up reaching out to him to work on thumbnails for my JoJo content in the first place. It looks professional grade even when he makes shit posts. Yes, dear viewer, your eyes do not deceive you. That is indeed the one and only Saul Goodman defending Jolyne Cujo in court. He actually made this fan art during the initial release of the Part 6 anime on Netflix back in 2022. And in that same year, he would later get reached out to by a production assistant from the anime production studio RA Craft. You might not recognize their name, but this group had previously worked on episode 23 of the Stone Ocean adaptation. And despite having no past experience working in the anime industry, the production assistant offered Grand a position working on what would eventually become episode 34, the first part of the Sea Moon fight. Obviously, he gladly accepted the offer laid out in front of him, and somehow, as if that wasn't enough on its own, he would later be promoted to the chief animation director for that very episode. Pretty freaking amazing for someone who was completely new to the industry that he found himself in. And to top it all off, all of this seemed to have occurred while I was working on this series, the Iceberg that you are watching right now. For context and proof, I commissioned the first piece of thumbnail art from Grand all the way back in the year 2020 while we were talking on Discord. Back then, I was more or less still in the research phase of this project, and I reached out to him for some artwork as I had done previously with my Phantom Blood video. By the time his episode was released on Netflix, not only was I super stoked to see him finally get the recognition he deserved as an artist, but I also felt extremely lucky that I had gotten the opportunity to work with him in the first place. It's really cool that in a roundabout sort of way, I got an actual JoJo anime crew member to work on this art for me. And I'm not afraid to say that I was totally geeking out over the prospect. Like, come on, this is freaking awesome. Oh, yeah, and also, I guess I should bring this up too. After Grand's work on JoJo Part 6 was over, he actually went on to work on some other lesser-known anime series that I would highly suggest checking out. I just gotta make sure I'm reading these right. Chainsaw Man, and that other anime I mentioned before, One Piece. Both of them are really good, and I don't think a lot of people watch them, but you should check them out definitely after you finish this video. Anyway, the moral of this story is that you should 100% follow Grand over on Twitter at GrandGuerrilla. I'll have his stuff linked down in the description as well, so you have no excuse not to shoot him a follow. I really recommend checking out his fan art of his interpretation of what a Steel Ball Run anime could look like. It's crazy good stuff. I'm obsessed with it. The style is like on point, my god. But hey, if you want to know more about Grand, I can tell you this. He's a massive asshole. While I was working on this video series, you know, the one that took me freaking forever amongst all my other projects, Grand would consistently DM me with like new JoJo trivia that I've never heard before that I found really interesting. And he wasn't doing so because he thought it would be cool to show me because I'm interested in JoJo trivia. No. He was doing it because he knew I had no self-control and that I would add it to the Iceberg series, which would then give me more work to do, which would then cause the video to come out later. So hey, Grand, if you're listening, fuck you. /SRS. Thumbnail Easter eggs. Okay, if you thought I was done over-explaining things and getting extremely meta in this video, you, my friend, are incorrect. If you paid any attention to the thumbnails that were used for the videos in this series, you might notice that 3 of them hold some hidden Easter eggs, so just to be thorough, let's go over them in short order. For the second video, I used Joseph Joestar for the thumbnail. Now, I didn't only choose this because it's a reference to the fact that he is the main character of part 2 of the series, but I also chose it because his pose here is a direct parallel to a similar pose he would later strike in Stardust Crusaders, along with his well-known catchphrase, "Oh my god!" Next up, the thumbnail for the third part of this series uses my personal favorite JoJo, Josuke Higashikata. If you happen to find his face here familiar, it's because it's directly ripped from the manga. It's that one bizarre face he makes after ruining his fancy designer shoes in the Let's Go Hunting story arc. It's one of my favorite images in like the entirety of the story. It's so good. And finally, last but certainly not least, for the fourth and final thumbnail of this iceberg, I used art of Guido Mista. Now, the reason he looks so distraught is because I made the conscious decision to feature art of him on the 4th iceberg video. If you remember, Mista suffers from severe tetraphobia, otherwise known as the irrational fear of the number 4. And I did this because I'm just a little freak. I'm just a little nasty guy. I love to see people suffer. If you got all those callbacks and references, then good for you. You have a good eye. If you're pissed at me for over-explaining them and continuing to pad out this iceberg, then please leave a comment. Maybe even several, if you'd like. Oh, what was that? What? You think I'm... Oh, no. What? No, I'm not doing this because I want the interaction to boost my channel in the algorithm or anything. No, I'm just asking because I care, and I will totally read all of your comments, every single one.
Now you're gonna say, oh, well, it matters, it doesn't matter anyway, because, oh, shit! What doesn't matter anyway, because, oh, shit!
JoJoler. Welcome to the true final tier of the iceberg. I think. You may have achieved heaven, but now it is time for you to ascend to true JoJoler status. That's right, we can go even further beyond. If you don't know, JoJoler is a Japanese slang term for the biggest of fans. It's a word that combines the terms of JoJo and lover into one powerful phrase. That's right, you did it, kid. You stuck it out to the very end. Let's start our victory lap. Please, oh my god, can we start the victory lap? Oh my god, I've worked on this video series for 2 years! Haruno Higashikata. Haruno Higashikata is one of the greatest JoJo characters to ever exist. Not necessarily because of his important ties to Josuke in Part 8, or the vital role he plays in JoJoline's final chapters, but instead because of the fact that he is a completely fake non-canon character created just to fuck with people. Yeah, if you thought that this guy was real, then you have fallen for the prank. Congratulations. If you aren't caught up with the manga, I wouldn't blame you for thinking that this dude is real, because that's his sole purpose. Haruno Higashikata was created to troll people who haven't yet read up with the manga. Even his name was created with authenticity in mind. Since multiple important characters from parts 7 and 8 are named after specific people from past parts, Haruno is actually named after Giorno Giovanna's original Japanese name, Haruno Shiobana. And since most people aren't caught up with the non-anime content and only have a surface level understanding of it through the video game releases and people posting on Twitter, this sort of naming scheme just makes sense to them and makes it feel like this dude might actually exist within the story somewhere. Basically, the whole thing is just kind of group gaslighting, and that is why it's become my favorite in-joke in the Western community. I just fucking love lying to people, making up shit on the fly about a character that doesn't exist just for shits and giggles. That just sounds like fun to me. That's just entertaining. After reading up and researching on Twitter about all of the group gaslighting, I actually discovered that the concept behind Haruno was actually started by fellow YouTuber and shitposter Aeonstar. He was even chill enough to talk to me about some questions I had and explain some stuff about the joke's origin, so I could therefore ruin it for a bunch of people online. This is what he had to say.
It wasn't explicitly planned out, but I did do it with some level of precognition, how it would play out if people did start playing along. It was inspired by a mix of things. First was prior community-based gaslighting attempts for The Simpsons and Super Mario with Gumbly and Scrupulous Fingor, respectively. Second was that I just really liked the idea of Josuke's twin brother, since that was a real thing in Jolyne.
He goes on to link the character of Haruno to a theory he created about Part 8 when the manga was still running. I don't have time to get into the theory here, but if you want to know his thoughts on Part 8 at the time it was still going, as well as this theory, then you can watch his video on YouTube.
When I made the Jolyne coronation theory, that was a big part of the theming that I locked in on, this idea of Josuke as a twinless twin. So I thought, what if that character was still alive? That was a pretty believable idea that people could latch onto. I also made sure the differences between Haruno and Josuke were minute, distinct, and easy to make, so people could do their own versions quickly. I put it up unprompted, and people got into it pretty quickly. GrandGuerrilla made a lot of edits that proliferated really fast, and if I remember correctly, Kate from my Discord made the wiki page that people ended up finding often.
Honestly, that's the whole other thing about this that I really love. The sheer amount of fake evidence of his existence that people have made over the past year or so. From fan art to fake manga panels to literally making him playable in Eyes of Heaven through mods. Because why not, I guess? If he's real, he should be a secret character in the game. Real quick, I want to thank Aeonstar for dropping in to give me his thoughts and recording audio for this video. Thanks a ton, dude. Seriously, you made researching this section a lot easier and more comprehensive than I ever thought it would end up being. So, yeah, thanks a bunch. Koji Kosuke and Rohan Kishibe are old friends. I think that by now, we all understand at this point that Araki takes inspiration from a lot of different places when writing for his manga. The world around him and his interests are his muse, and this even extends to other manga artists. And in regards to this entry, Koji Kosuke. Kosuke is a manga artist who is notable for his baseball-centric manga, which I will try my best to pronounce, Kenritsu Umisora Kokoyaku Buin Yamashita Taru-kun. I probably fucked that up. If the comments on my videos are any sort of indicator, I will never pronounce anything correctly, ever. So I doubt that I got that one right. But anyway, back to the entry. What some people don't know is that Kosuke is also a friend of Araki's, and the first manga artist that he would go on to meet in person. The two of them were neighbors and actually had a great relationship. And it's because of this that Kosuke would go on to be referenced a good chunk of times throughout JoJo's publication. In fact, getting back to the subject of this entry, in chapter 321 of the manga, Rohan even mentions him by name when talking about whom he admires the most. And later on, during the initial magazine publication of Thus Spoke Kishibe Rohan, it's revealed that Rohan and Kosuke were old friends, just like him and Araki were in real life. I think that it's hilarious that Araki has gone on record to say that nothing about Rohan is based on himself whatsoever, but then we get stuff like this that clearly parallels himself in real life with Rohan. Like, dude is trying his best to hide the fact that he is just Rohan himself, that he's just him. I just hope that Araki doesn't, like, lick spiders and act like a complete weirdo. But given all the stuff that I've researched on this Iceberg at this point, I don't think that I can firmly believe that. Dude is very, very strange. Phantom Blood alternate ending. Alright, so I know what the subject says, but I'm gonna need you to reel back your expectations just a little bit here, because I've kind of clickbaited you, just a tiny bit. Okay, so remember that Phantom Blood PS2 game I talked about way earlier on the Iceberg? We've already discussed the alternate scenarios that can happen in the game's plot when played under certain conditions. You know, like when the player somehow wins the boxing match against Dio and then the aftermath of the scene changes slightly. Well, this same sort of system actually affects the ending of the game overall. This feature is extremely demanding, but yeah, if the player can achieve an S rank on Chapter 22 of Story Mode, they'll be able to unlock a new version of the final battle between Jonathan and Dio on the cruise ship. But instead of fighting Dio's lackey, Wang Chan, Dio will instead revive 3 zombie knights, just like Tarkus and Bruford, to fight you on the boat. Now, again, the final result of the story won't change. Jonathan is still very much going to die, rip my mans, but I think it's really cool that we seemingly have some obscure Phantom Blood characters in this alternate ending that not a lot of people are actually aware of. Well, I mean, it makes sense. Who the hell is out there trying to get S ranks in this game anyway? Go touch some grass, or even better yet, go and read some One Piece. I'm almost caught up to Wano, and it's really, really good. My favorite Straw Hats are Usopp, Brook, and Chopper. And actually, you know what? No, like, definitely Luffy, too. I love Luffy. And you know what? Zoro, too. God damn it, there's too many good characters in this goddamn series. Anyway, so yeah, read One Piece. Sorry, don't mean to make this a One Piece iceberg. That would be insane if I got this far and just started talking about One Piece for the rest of the iceberg. Araki's former pupil taught the author of My Hero Academia. While writing the manga for Part 7 Steel Ball Run, Araki had an assistant that worked with him by the name of Yasuke Tanaka. Tanaka was a manga artist in his own right, having worked on numerous series before and after his work on JoJo. However, the most interesting aspect of his career, or at least to me for this iceberg, is that similar to his work with Araki, he would go on to have his own assistant later on in his career, an artist by the name of Kohei Horikoshi. And if you think that his name sounds familiar, it's probably because it does. Horikoshi would go on to create another popular Shonen Jump series in My Hero Academia. This means that through only a couple of degrees of separation, JoJo has an inherent connection with My Hero Academia, and I think that's really cool. There's nothing much really else to say about this topic, so instead, to wrap up this entry, I'll recount a slightly related personal story about my experience with the My Hero fanbase. So, one time on Twitter, I said that My Hero would probably be way more interesting of a story if Deku never received superpowers in the first place, and I received multiple death threats. I love anime fans. I think they're so cool and normal. Bad Company camo design. You know, now that I think about it, it's kind of wild that I haven't brought up the live-action movie adaptation of Part 4 all that much on this iceberg. I mean, I don't have much to say about it. It's just a live-action film adaptation of Part 4, Diamond is Unbreakable, and it's only really the first bit of the story. Judging by the contents of the film, it seems like they planned there to be several sequels to jumpstart a series that covered the entire plot in full, but the film didn't end up performing super well in the box office, so the series will forever remain unfinished. I want to be honest here, I haven't gotten the time to sit down and watch it in full yet, which is very weird considering that it's a movie that covers my favorite part of the manga, but I just don't have that much drive to check it out at the moment, especially since I know it probably won't get any follow-ups to complete its story. I kinda hate getting invested in stuff that I know ended up getting cut short for whatever reason. Cough cough, Inside Job, cough cough, Infinity Train. However, just because I don't have much to personally say about the movie doesn't mean that there still isn't any trivia to be talked about. And surprisingly, it lies within the design of the stand Bad Company. Company. Yeah, Bad Company, the stand of Keicho Nijimura, Okuyasu's brother. The live-action version of the stand Bad Company in the film uses a camo design pattern that was actually drawn up by Araki himself for the film. It's pretty hard to see the design in the footage, but when you look at the isolated textures, you can very much tell that Araki had a hand in it. You can probably see it too, but it very much has his unique style imprinted on it. We don't know for sure how much influence he had on the film itself, but it's nice to see that he touched it in at least a small little way during development. I hope that he ended up enjoying how everything came out, even though it didn't really succeed financially. It must have been fun to see his characters portrayed by live-action actors for one of the first times. Like, cosplay is one thing, but having your characters show up on the big screen with like a full production and script and acting is probably something else. Alright, I don't want to ramble too much here because I gotta keep going and move on to the next entry in a sec, but I'd be remiss if I never brought up the live-action Thus Spoke Kishibe Rohan TV show. Yeah, so in a similar way to the movie, I don't have that much to say on it, but I just wanted to mention it at least once, you know, since I didn't have time to find anything for it or put it on the list. Sorry, I guess, sue me. But thankfully though, unlike the Part 4 movie, this TV show has actually found some pretty good success and has already gotten 3 seasons worth of content and a theatrical film. I'm really hoping that its success ends up communicating that live-action JoJo still has the potential to be good. I'm just really interested to see what people could do with adapting JoJo content for live action. Jodai. Jodai is the pseudonym of Japanese painter and photographer Kunohiro Watanabe. He was a former assistant of Hirohiko Araki and worked with him during the publication of Steel Ball Run and later Jolyne. During that time, Watanabe would hide his nickname through various background elements in the series, leading to the nickname Jodai becoming a frequent Easter egg that was sprinkled throughout the manga for a short time. This sort of stuff is just plain fun, hiding these tiny details throughout your work for eagle-eyed readers to find. I really enjoy this sort of thing. However, sadly though, it seems that Watanabe didn't really enjoy working on JoJo as much as this entry might have you think. Since, according to an old Facebook post, he found the job insanely demanding, with the sheer amount of time he had to spend erasing and redrawing his work over and over. He would even go on to refer to his old office space in which he worked in as Green Dolphin Street Prison. You know, in reference to Stone Ocean. Yeah. Though, despite his issues with his job, he doesn't seem like he has any animosity towards Araki or JoJo directly, as he ends his post with an inspirational quote from Bruno Bucciarati himself. You know, the GOAT. Honestly, I wish Watanabe the best of luck in his own endeavors. He's a really talented guy, and I'm glad that he made the choice to leave the series before he got massively burned out. Good for him. Part 1 and Part 7 colored scans were made during the Phantom Blood movie. This entry is exactly what it says on the tin. From what we can gather, it seems like some of the official colored scans for Parts 1 and 7 made by Shueisha were actually created during the promotion of the Phantom Blood animated film. The reason as to why this is a widely accepted reality is because of a few curious factors. As readers with a sharp eye can tell, Part 1 and earlier volumes of Part 7 have a distinctly different style of coloring and shading from the rest of the series. This earlier method of coloring feels a little bit rougher and grittier than the softer and more consistent color choices of the other scans, and honestly, they do tend to stick out in a pretty big way when compared. The vibes here just feel completely different from the rest of the colored scan releases, and it's never been officially stated as to why this is the case. On top of this, these scans were only officially released to the public in full in the year 2012 as a part of the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure digital collection. Now, the reason that I bring this up is that the year here is very important, the year 2012. And that's simply because some of the panels from this later release actually first appeared in an ad in Ultra Jump, an ad that wasn't advertising their later digital release in 2012. an ad that was actually originally published a few years earlier, back in 2007. So yeah, it seems like these rougher colored scans were actually seemingly made 5 years before that they would be officially released. And if this is indeed the case, it makes total sense why these scans in particular would look so different compared to others in the series. Given the year that this ad was published, the timeline here suggests that these colored scans were originally made for the release of the Phantom Blood movie, or even the Phantom Blood PS2 game. Maybe these specific scans would have been printed in a physical volume or two that you could buy as a part of a merchandise tie-in or something. That, to me at least, makes the most sense, but really it could have been for anything. Though it seems that given the context, the original intentions for them were later cancelled. Although we don't know whatever that plan was, the release of these scans would be delayed until 2012, when Shueisha would go on to color the entirety of the manga in the way that we know it today. We may never know the original intentions of these scans, but at least we know why they look a little bit different compared to everything else. Toth is real. Back in 2002, Shueisha published the Oingo Boingo Brothers Adventure in Japan, a JoJo's Bizarre Adventure spin-off one-shot manga that was essentially just a physical replication of the stand Toth from Stardust Crusaders. Yeah, the book itself is simply just a compilation and full-scale artistic rendition of Toth's predictions from Part 3. It's not really printed with the intention of being a full, coherent story on its own, and is more of a collector's item for diehard fans, i.e. me. The thing that makes it compelling beyond that, however, is that there's actually a canonical in-universe reason as to why the book was published like this in the first place. That's right, Shueisha, the publishing company, is canon to JoJo, and this all makes sense in the grander extended JoJo canon. Okay, let's get into this lore. According to miscellaneous information contained within the manga itself, after the story of Stardust Crusaders, Boingo was actually approached by an employee from Shueisha as they were on vacation in Egypt. Upon their first meeting, the employee took some pictures of his stand, and then went on to publish it officially in Japan. There's actually a lot of other funny stuff about the physical book too, like how after the last prediction from Part 3, the book just has a bunch of empty pages for the rest of its run, indicating that Boingo hasn't used it since his last encounter with the Crusaders. However, I think the best part about it overall is how the last few pages include a short interview with Rohan Kishibe and his thoughts on Toth after having properly read it. It's a really amusing interview because, like, initially he thinks it's a crazy, well-made manga, especially for a kid Boingo's age, and praises the art direction and use of what he believes is symbolism and a well-crafted social commentary throughout the story. But then Rohan figures out that it was all just Boingo's stand, and he didn't actually write anything at all, so he goes on this insanely salty rant about how it's an insult to mangaka everywhere to call this thing manga, and how actually he just like hates it. It's hilarious. Rohan ranting about his opinions on manga and art is always really funny to me. Kinda makes you think what he'd say about AI art these days. He'd probably hate that too. Sam Raimi Playboy Interview. This is a collection of words that I would have never thought would be related to JoJo in any way, but yeah, it actually surprisingly does. In the July 2004 edition of the Japanese version of Playboy magazine, yeah, I know, weirdly specific, Sam Raimi and Hirohiko Araki have a conversation with each other about his most recently released movie, Spider-Man 2. So like, at first I had no idea why Araki in particular was chosen to interview Sam about the movie, but it all started to make sense when I thought about Araki's fondness for the horror genre. Yeah, so turns out he's a massive fan of Raimi's catalog, especially with the Evil Dead movies, and you can easily see it by the way he talks with Sam throughout the interview. I can assume that Araki's favorite scene in Spider-Man 2 is probably the one where Doc Ock's tentacle tentacles murk all of those surgeons for like no reason. He actually brings it up in particular when he talks about aspects of the film that he's a fan of. The entire interview is fantastic stuff. The way that they talk about and share their ideas on storytelling is really engaging and fun and just a great read overall. Here's a short segment from the interview that I really enjoy. I think one of the most appealing things about Spider-Man is the misunderstandings from the people around him since his true identity hasn't been exposed. I'm worried that if you direct the next 3 films, you'll have a hard time. I'm currently planning the next one in my hotel room and I'm having a hard time. If you have any good ideas, please contact me in my room this evening.
Hey, yo, what the fuck?
So yeah, according to the transcription, they laugh like a lot in this interview. It's literally goat to goat communication. I love it so much. Now, just as a reminder, this is an interview about Spider-Man 2, so JoJo isn't even mentioned offhandedly, like at all. But that doesn't mean that Raimi doesn't connect with Araki on other things. He actually does end up remarking on Araki's artwork and even how wonderful he thinks it looks. Here are some brief excerpts about that from the transcript. Having finished Spider-Man 2, I can honestly say that it was just as good as the first one. Hey, thank you. I was also shown your work, Araki, and it was quite wonderful. I was really impressed. Oh, please, haha. I've always been a big fan of your taste and direction. For example, small scenes such as when the nails screeched from being dragged left an impression. You're very perceptive, haha. When I saw your work, I had a feeling you'd be the type to notice those kinds of moments. I'm proud to say now that the skills I've cultivated as a horror writer can still be put to good use here and there. I wanted the audience to be frightened with how scary the villain was, so that was a method I used to show suspense and make your heart race. Later in the conversation, Raimi even goes on to suggest that Araki would make for an amazing CGI artist if that was something he ever wanted to be. And while Araki clarifies that he isn't all that interested in that side of creation and instead prefers what he does now, you can tell that he's very flattered by the compliment. God, it's such a cute interview, I'm gonna die! Crossover of the Millennia, one of my favorite discoveries from working on this video. Heavy Gauge. Heavy Gauge is a Japanese studio that's focused in the creation of anime and manga related figures, specifically garage kit figures. They're basically a type of model kit that you can get of a specific character, but instead of just building it like a normal model, it's cast in a solid color of polyurethane resin, meaning, in layman's terms, you can paint it yourself in however which way you'd like. It's like Legos, but for adults! I actually just found out about these while I was researching, and I really like the idea of them. DIY activity stuff where you can build and color your own professionally molded figure is really amusing for me and kind of tickles my brain in just the right place. Honestly, I gotta pick myself up one of these just to try it out for myself. It'd probably come out horrible, but as long as I have fun while doing it, you know? I'm saying that to deflect the fact that it would probably look like this. Anyway, like I said, Heavy Gauge focuses on the creation of these sorts of figures. God fucking damn it. Anyway, like I said, Heavy Gauge focuses on the creation of these sorts of figures and is actually notable for being the first company ever to produce figures on JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Yep, these guys got the opportunity to work on and sell the very first JoJo figures to ever exist, and even though some of them look a little bit off model-wise in some places, they're still important for being some of the very first pieces of JoJo merch to ever exist, dating all the way back to the 90s. The line of figures that they would end up manufacturing came in 2 waves, and included characters based on Part 3 and later on Part 2. There was planned to be a 3rd wave of figures a bit later on, this time based on Part 5 characters, however this ended up being cancelled for whatever reason. I couldn't tell you why, but maybe these weren't selling well. Prototypes were created for a select handful of characters for Wave 3, but these wouldn't end up in production or circulation and would never see the light of day. So I'm actually pretty sure that these prototypes would fetch a pretty high price among collectors. One last thing I want to mention before moving on that I found kinda neat is how before their proper release, the Part 3 figures were actually used as promotional artwork for the official video game guidebook for the Famicom Stardust Crusaders game, the same one that I talked about way earlier on this Iceberg. There is just something so 90s about this. Particularly, it gives me the vibes of the official renders for Mother 2 or Earthbound in the States. Having physical models to represent video game characters is such a cool aesthetic. I wish more games would do it nowadays, but I get why they stopped. Stupid 3D modeling and CG ruining everything. All I want to do is see video game characters like they just popped out of a Rankin and Bass production or some shit. You know, like Rudolph and the one with the Santa Claus and he go 1 foot in front of that one. I want to be able to clearly picture Jotaro Kujo beating the absolute tar out of Yukon Cornelius. I mean, could you imagine that? Could you imagine that with your brain?
I want to be a dentist.
Oh yeah? Well, I want to save my mother Holly Kujo from being killed by the stand that awakened within her due to the return of Dio Brando, an ancient evil vampire.
JoJo in the Silver Case. Alright, so there's this video game. It's called The Silver Case. It came out in 1999. Full disclosure, I know nothing about it and will probably continue to know nothing about it. Just doesn't really seem up my alley. However, the reason I want to discuss it is actually because of a weirdly direct JoJo-related Easter egg that was recently discovered in the game. In the room of a character named Koichi, you can find a stack of what at first seems to be a bunch of generic-looking books placed messily next to his desk. But looking at the textures for these books up close, we can actually get a better view, and you can clearly see that their front covers are an edited and abstract version of Weekly Shonen Jump, with a cover that features artwork of Josuke and Jotaro from the beginning of Part 4. This detail on its own is very cool, but I don't know if having these books in the room of a character named Koichi is somehow an even more direct nod to the series or not, but regardless, it's still a fascinating little secret hidden in plain sight. Vento Oreo Pinball. I really love the novelty of older websites. You know, back when Flash and Flash games were still a relatively new concept and people were still actively using forums to talk to others online, it was just a really charming era for the World Wide Web. And this entry, well, it's a part of that era. One of the early JoJo websites that promoted JoJo Part 6 actually had a unique Easter egg that was implemented into its HTML code. By clicking on a graphic of the stand Manhattan Transfer that was present on the webpage a certain number of times, you'd be redirected, or transferred in this case, to a special hidden webpage that contained a pinball flash game that was themed around Part 5. Now let's not get crazy here, it's a very archaic pinball minigame, and by today's standards it's nothing crazy interesting, but it was a cool little secret that a few people were able to access at the time. The way that this was hidden kind of reminds me of the Homestar Runner web series. Does anybody watching remember that at all? It was one of the earliest popular examples of an animated internet web show, and I was obsessed with it when I was a kid. No joke, it was big before YouTube was even a major thing. The reason that this pinball game reminds me of it is because at the end of each Homestar animation, there'd be this secret clickable option embedded into the animation itself that would take you to different alternative web pages. It was really just sort of a, you just had to be there kind of thing. The way that all worked actually inspired me to hide secret links in my videos too. I have quite a few big and small projects that I posted to YouTube with secret redirects to other stuff if you want to try and find them for yourself. Anyway, sorry for the unrelated ramble, but if you've been watching this video the whole time, I really doubt you mind me trailing off every once in a while about stuff. You know me, I just think stuff is neat. I talk about neat things. Johnny Joestar miniature figurine mistake. JoJo merchandise. There's a lot of it. You all probably understand at this point, but when a franchise is this successful, license holders do their best to try and take advantage of that success. And take advantage they do. There's a lot of stuff to buy related to this series. I haven't gotten the chance to bring this stuff up too much on the Iceberg, mostly because I don't think there's that much to talk about other than pulling a soy jack and pointing at the stuff I want to buy. However, there is one thing that I can talk about, and it's really stupid, but I'm already scraping the bottom of the barrel here, so why not bring it up? Like, I'm sure that some people are gonna get really pissy with me about how granular some of these explanations can be, but I'm being self-referential about it, like Deadpool. So you you legally cannot get mad. That's like an unwritten YouTube thing. You're not allowed to get mad at me if I make a joke about it. Okay, so to get back on track, there used to be a company that made official JoJo figures that went by the name Banpresto. I say used to because it technically doesn't exist anymore. It actually got absorbed into Bandai Spirits, a subsidiary of Bandai Namco. If I'm understanding it correctly, they still use the name for branding purposes. It's just a smaller bit of a bigger whole now. Banpresto has made a decent chunk of figure lines for the series, with most of them being really freaking clean and nice looking, at least on preview images online. And while I was searching through their catalog, I thought I actually recognized the style of figures that they made, and wouldn't you know it, I actually own one of them and never knew. Yeah, so quick detour, but this entire time I had a Bruno Bucciarati statue from their Mafia Art collection. Mafia Art was actually a brand of figures made to celebrate the airing of the JoJo Golden Wind anime season, featuring a complete set of characters from Giorno's main crew. Now again, I only own Bruno, so I can really only talk about him, but I really admire the details on the figure and the pose they decided to give him. Although sadly, the figure's pose itself isn't super functional per se. Bruno doesn't really have a good center of gravity and he falls over really easily. The mount that came with him doesn't really help either, and honestly shifts the entire statue into a slight forward-leaning position that kind of looks like that one dance move from Smooth Criminal, the one where Michael Jackson leans forward and goes hee hee. I don't know, it kind of feels like a design flaw or a mistake. And hey, speaking of mistakes, that brings me back to the actual subject of this entry. Oh boy, you thought I was talking about Bruno? It's actually something completely different, and I sidetracked for no reason. So back on topic, Banpresto made a certain series of items called World Collectible Figures. They were these smaller, more cutesy figurines that featured characters cherry-picked from throughout JoJo's publication history. I'd like to say that they were designed in a more chibi style, but in reality, they look more like novelty bobbleheads. Anyway, this entry is referring to a strange inconsistency present on the Johnny figurine in the line specifically. In preview images of the statue, you can plainly see many white stars peppered across his hat and pants. However, one star from the pattern present on his left knee is surprisingly not present on the actual produced figure. You can see this vacancy much clearer when I put both images on screen here for comparison. The star on his knee isn't there for some reason. Whoa! I don't have the foggiest idea as to what caused this error, if it even is an error, and I really doubt that anybody cares about it besides me. But if for some reason one of you out there owns this figure, I just know you'll never be able to unsee this detail ever again. Quick aside, I actually found out that I have one of the figures in the miniature line in my collection already, just like with the statue of Bruno. The one I have is this chibi road roller piece with Dio laying on top. Again, it's super cool how I just accidentally got to learn about merch I actually own. I didn't go into this topic with that in mind, it just sort of happened that way. Now, whenever I host parties, I can be super annoying and tell people trivia about all of my stupid toys. And in response, they can shoot me in the chest with a Browning Auto 5 shotgun. Actually, if you're a longtime viewer of my channel, you might recognize this figure in specific. Surprisingly, it was gifted to me by my friend Pasty in one of my old live action vlogs from around 6 years ago now. Meaning that I literally have footage of me unboxing one of these WCF figures, so here's some of that.
Hey guys, what's going on? It's Salty Toys here, gonna unbox this Dio statue. It's gonna be great. I can only use one hand because I don't have a tripod. Please don't tease me. Please don't tease me. My first time.
The road rollers actually come separately, and you also get Dio, and you can prop Dio upon the road roller, kind of like a small lizard.
He drives it.
Wait a minute.
Imbecile.
Oh my god.
Oh my god.
It works perfectly.
As you can tell, I was a complete cornball in 2018, and if I could go back in time, I'd pull a Sarah Connor on myself. Those old videos might have sucked ass, but I'm actually really glad I have footage of me receiving this figure specifically. Feels like I was fated to somehow bring this up in a video again. Goddamn. Jotaro X Kakyoin Snail Dojin. Can I be for real with you for a second? You and I both know we both know what I'm about to say. So, just enjoy, I guess. I don't even know how to explain this to somebody without sounding like the most fucked up weirdo to ever exist. So I'm just gonna give you the short of it and hope that satiates your curiosity, because you really do not need to look into this further at all. Okay, remember that Kakyoin X Horse Jotaro Dojin that I talked about earlier on the Iceberg? The one that makes me want to pour bleach into my corneas directly? That one? So, basically, there's this other JoJo Dojin very similar to that horse one, except this time around, Kakyoin and Jotaro are snails for some reason. Like, they've reincarnated as snails, and then they like do the dirty as snails. I feel like if I said any of this to a small Victorian child, they would spontaneously combust right before my eyes. It's a story about snail fucking. What the hell do you want me to say? Anyway, here's a gif of a monkey to distract you from the fact that I just said snail fucking. God damn it, I said it again. Taizo Mote King Saga. Taizo Mote King Saga was a seemingly niche gag manga that featured in Weekly Shonen Jump alongside other titles. The reason that I'm even aware of it, and it's relevant to this list at all, is because the manga actually contains a really large amount of JoJo references and jokes. And when I say JoJo references here, I'm not talking about it in like a meme way. I'm saying that the author of King Saga is an insanely hardcore fan and can't stop himself from referencing the series every like 2 seconds. No joke, I'm deathly serious. Look at all of this. The manga references other Shonen Jump titles too, quite frequently, but none as frequent as how much it parodies JoJo. It's because of this that Araki has gone on record personally recommending the series on multiple occasions. Very high praise. I don't think it's ever gotten an official English localization, so that kinda sucks. It would be cool if somebody picked up and translated some more obscure stuff like this. Like, I know it wouldn't be super popular, but I don't know. Can somebody out there do it for me specifically? I want it, but I don't want to learn Japanese. I'm very lazy. Hanafuda Game mobile app. Starting in the late 2000s, Bandai began publishing a series of official Hanafuda sets themed around JoJo. Hanafuda are a type of playing cards that are mainly popular in Japan, and while looking vaguely similar to Western-style playing cards, they tend to be much smaller in size and depict various pieces of artwork instead of numbers and symbols. Even if you haven't heard of them before, you may already know a popular manufacturer of these sorts of cards, the present-day video game company, Nintendo. Back in 1889, before they went on to become the video game juggernaut they're known as today, Nintendo was actually first created to sell Hanafuda cards. Now, of course, none of this is related to JoJo whatsoever, but I always get the urge to tell people about that whenever I get the chance. Oh, actually, while we're at it, did you know? The game that we know as Super Mario Bros. 2 is actually a modified version of a game called Doki Doki Panic. So, to circle back for a second, like I said, Bandai made Hanafuda card sets based around the JoJo series starting in the late 2000s. They probably ended up doing pretty well financially too, because later they would publish a JoJo Hanafuda mobile app based around said card sets. From all that I can tell, the mobile app was released exclusively in Japan and most likely dropped early in the lifespan of the iPod Touch. The reason that I assume this is based on the little pale white sheen over the application art. When the iPod Touch was still considered a new thing on the market, Apple had every app on the system have this distinct white reflective sheen over it. This was initially done to make the technology and software look sleek and futuristic in design, but now it just looks outdated and out of touch, ironically enough. Get it? Out of touch. I'm so funny. That's the problem with trying to make something look fresh and new. Eventually, it'll just become the standard and seem uninspired by comparison. But man, remember when this stuff was still new? Dude, those were the days. This Hanafuda mobile app looks like something I'd have on my first generation iPod Touch, right next to Crash Nitro Kart and Tiny Wings. Damn, did anybody else play Tiny Wings? That was my shit. I could play that for hours. Well, I used to play for hours. Nowadays, my brain cells and attention span have been melted by TikTok and Subway Surfers gameplay over South Park clips? Soul Beat Replica Soundtrack. Back when Steel Ball Run was still in the midst of being published, various promotional videos were created and hosted on the official website for the series. As you can imagine, these were intended to entice new readers and advertise the latest arcs and chapters of the time. Normally, these wouldn't be much to write home about, but there's actually some captivating and niche content hiding within these trailers. First off, and something I've already discussed lightly before, these videos actually featured some early concepts for the official JoJo colored scans by JoJo D, most notably of which being the color palette used for Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, which would later undergo a few changes for the official release. As I said though, I've already touched on that stuff earlier, so I don't want to retread similar ground. The thing I want to bring up for this entry is actually the music used in these ads. Surprisingly, the team that created these videos actually went through the trouble of commissioning new custom music made specifically for this series of advertisements. The tracks were created by an artist named Poyama and were played throughout each trailer that was created, helping to frame the overall tone of the series and the arc that was being shown off. The music itself has a really unique vibe to it when compared to other JoJo-associated soundtracks. And while it mostly feels authentic to the established tone of Steel Ball Run, some of the tracks are noticeably tonally dissonant with the visuals being shown off. There's a couple of instances where you wouldn't think that certain parts of the soundtrack would fit with the part of the story they're trying to advertise, and it can lead to some of the songs feeling weirdly out of place. This point isn't unfounded either, because according to Poyama, they actually initially created the collection of music for an original story that they imagined in their head. A story that was directly inspired by their involvement in the creation of the promotional videos for Part 7. So any sort of mismatched tone between the music and visuals can most likely be pointed to as a result of this tangential inspiration. It's also because of this fact that Poyama would actually go on to release all of the songs he made for the project as an independent artist, a few months after the conclusion of the Steel Ball Run manga. They were all compiled into a single album named Soul Beat Replica, which of course was given its own official, legally distinct art that is obviously loosely inspired by, well, what else? Steel Ball Run. The name itself, Soul Beat Replica, even shares its acronym with Steel Ball Run, with both of them being able to be abbreviated as SBR. All of this is just to say that Soul Beat Replica is actually the closest that we're going to get to an official soundtrack to Steel Ball Run, or at least until it eventually gets adapted into an anime. Personally, I'm fairly mixed on the album from what I've listened to. You can tell that Poyama took a much more experimental route when crafting tracks for the project, and I'm not really sure if it fits super well with JoJo at a certain point. Again, I know that these technically weren't made for JoJo specifically, I think, but given their close ties together, it's going to affect my views of the music at least a little bit. That being said though, I love the vibes and Western influence that some of the songs have, especially with how Poyama puts their own unique spin on it. The addition of occasional sound effects and strange vocal samples really paint a picture in my brain in a really unique way. Again though, not really my thing personally, but there's definitely stuff I like about it, so, maybe check it out. It might not be the best musical representation for Part 7, but it's a unique little gem, if anything else. Kira Gore Porn Magazine. Yeah, okay, so the title for this entry is kind of loaded. Okay, very loaded. The long and short of it is that Araki was featured in an interview published in a periodical by the name of Bubka Magazine in August of 1997. Normally, this would be all there is to say. However, the magazine itself is sort of insane, as in like, holy shit, I have no idea why Araki had an interview in this kind of insane. It's full of some very unsavory stuff, like advertisements for various sex hotlines, full frontal nudity, straight up pornography, and pictures of what I think are dead bodies? As well as even more things that I can't further list off here because, yeah. It's currently unclear if Araki actually fully understood the contents of the magazine itself. I say this because the interview conducted is some pretty standard fare stuff. I mean, I'd like to think that he didn't know. By the tone of the interview, it kind of seems like he doesn't. The whole thing was conducted by Hachiro Taku, a freelance writer and critic who happened to be great friends with Araki at the time, as well as a colossal fan of his work. I'm kind of torn on the whole thing because on one hand, there's a lot of fascinating information about Araki and behind the scenes information throughout the interview, but a lot of it is also kind of weird and off-putting in a way. They talk about like killing people in their dreams and kind of just casually talk about recent serial killers and terrorist attacks at the time. I don't know, it gives off this strange feeling. It's kind of like if Taku and Araki were just two friends on a private Discord call at 3 a.m. and you're just sitting there like a fly on the wall invading their privacy and listening in. I'm not saying that it's a bad interview by any means, it just kind of gets strange in a couple of places. Taku talks a lot about his fascination with Kira Yoshikage from part 4. Araki actually explains in the interview that he actually had to hold back with Kira when writing a lot because his editor at the time would shoot down a lot of ideas that he had for scenes. Given that JoJo used to be a shonen manga that was published in Shonen Jump, a magazine that was aimed at younger boys, there were actually a select number of creepy and gross aspects of his character that he wasn't allowed to portray on panel. At the end of the day, Araki admits that this ended up being a good thing since it left a lot up to the imagination and made him more terrifying because of it, and I have to agree. The way that Kira was written was honestly perfect, I wouldn't change a thing. There's a lot of times where writing within limitations actually makes a character a lot more interesting than it would be otherwise, and I think that this is one of those moments. Actually, not to pivot real quick, but a fun tidbit from the interview that I especially enjoyed was finding out that Diamond is Unbreakable was directly inspired by the works of Stephen King. And now that I know that, I can actually totally see it, especially when it comes to the inclusion of more horror mystery elements like murderers, ghosts, and aliens. Pivoting again real quick, they actually briefly discuss in the interview the possibility of JoJo being adapted into an anime. Reminder, this interview was conducted in 1997 during the initial creation of Part 5. So being able to read it in retrospect is really captivating, and it holds a certain amount of dramatic irony in a sense given what we have now. It's really cool, I love it. Araki pretended to be Rohan. Okay, so this entry is actually a short continuation of the last one that I just talked about. I just found this entire story so funny that I just needed to give the topic its own highlight specifically, and given the title, I'm sure you can understand why. In the interview that Araki had with his buddy Taku, Taku reveals that Araki was actually nominated as a judge for a competition called the Rookie of the Year Award. It was kind of difficult to find anything on the contest itself, but from what I can tell, the Rookie of the Year Award is a competition that focuses on up-and-coming manga artists and showcasing new talent to the Japanese manga scene at large. As I said, Araki was once a judge for one of these very competitions. But according to Taku, instead of just participating as himself, you know, like a normal person would, Araki roleplayed as Rohan Kishibe in order to critique the material he read without feeling bad. Yes, he actually did this, and I say this with no hint of sarcasm. If you participated the year he was nominated, your manga would have been judged by the legendary mangaka himself, Rohan Kishibe. And because of the fact that Araki created Rohan in the first place, you know that whatever comes out of his mouth is something that Rohan would actually say to you if he existed. Anything that this man says during roleplay is canon. Legit, this is one of the funniest things I've ever heard of an author do. I just think that this whole thing is hilarious and I need more people to know about it, so there you go. SBR wasn't a JoJo part until it moved to Ultra Jump. Alright, so the title of this entry is both correct and incorrect at the same time. But the story of why this is very interesting, so let me explain. When Part 6 Stone Ocean originally ended its manga run, it was felt as a sort of finale to the entire fanbase, officially or not. The ending itself was a good indicator of this. With the events of Made in Heaven behind us, it was unclear how the story could be picked back up from there. The ending felt like, well, an ending. It was a literal narrative dead end, and probably couldn't be added to in any sort of satisfying way. This was enough to give people the idea that Araki might have been done with JoJo. Though arguably, his actions outside of the story spoke to this at a much higher volume. Up to this point in history, Araki had rarely ever taken breaks between parts of JoJo. He had stuck to the weekly publishing schedule so well that even during the transitions between parts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, he never actually gave himself any time off. He was so consistent about his work that even stuff like the ending of Stardust Crusaders and the start of Diamond is Unbreakable were only separated by a single week's time. Yeah, this and this were only a week apart from each other. It was because of such a consistent schedule that his later actions after Stone Ocean became a point of suspicion. For one of the first times ever, Araki took a visible step back from the series. After the completion of Stone Ocean in April of 2003, he would go on to maintain a complete radio silence for over 8 months' time. This period of absence was enough to convince people that maybe JoJo was actually over, that maybe Araki was taking a much-needed break after deciding that he was content with how the story ended. The whole thing just felt very out of character, and fans just reasoned that this may actually have been the end after all. However, as we know now, behind closed doors, this was clearly not the actual case. Araki decided that he did want to continue JoJo in some way, but just not in a way that people were privy to at this point. In order to not conflict with the ending of Part 6, he took the series in an entirely new direction that many would classify as a hard reboot. This direction, of course, was Steel Ball Run. Obviously, today we know that Steel Ball Run and onward is just a further extension of the JoJo series as a whole. That much is clear. But even so, at the time, that fact wasn't as explicit as you might think. At the beginning, Steel Ball Run was initially published in Shonen Jump, coming out weekly, much like previous parts of the series. But, and here's the kicker, in an attempt to appeal to new readers and attract more attention, the part was actually originally billed as an entirely new series, separate and distinct from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. The editorial department at Jump at the time made the decision to completely divorce it from the JoJo branding publicly, and instead chose to focus on advertising it as a completely new IP from the ground up. People just weren't made aware that it was secretly a reboot of JoJo all along, and assumed that any similarities were just meant to be surface-level references to the author's past work. This would actually remain the case until a decision was made to move Steel Ball Run's publication to Shonen Jump's older sibling, Ultra Jump. With this move, all of the proper branding was officially re-added to the series, publicly making it the next chapter of JoJo. You see, unlike Shonen Jump, Ultra Jump was a magazine that had a month-to-month release schedule instead of week-to-week. Because of this, Araki had a much looser work schedule and could create much longer chapters than what had been the norm up to that point. Also, thanks to Ultra Jump's older demographic of readers, Araki was free to explore much more mature and explicit themes in his work without the need to censor himself as much. Basically, the move to Ultra Jump was much more manageable and freeing to him. And while Steel Ball Run had always secretly been a part of JoJo, now the secret was out. There's a lot to talk about with Part 7 and Araki's mentality about hitting the reset button on the entire series. But most of that is just speculation, and I think I speak for everyone when I say that I've speculated enough on this Iceberg series. Something I do want to talk about though, and I think is a great way to cap all of this off, is the end of JoJo as a concept. Just like when Part 6 first ended, I think there's plenty of people speculating when JoJo might officially be over. and even if it might finish up by the end of Part 9 JoJo Lands. If you were to ask me a while back, I probably would have assumed the same. That the series is probably closer to a proper ending than it's ever been before. Araki has been at this for over 36 years at this point. He's created a lot of amazing characters, settings, battles, and in culmination of all of that, some of the best hand-drawn artwork that I've ever seen. The man is in his 60s and has gone above and beyond in earning his place in the Hall of Fame. He could realistically retire any day now, and it would make a lot of sense. Don't get me wrong, I don't want JoJo to end, but if it does, I think I'll be content with that. But, thankfully, it doesn't seem like that will actually be the case anytime soon. During the development of JoJo Lands, in an interview with a Japanese newspaper, Araki had this to say about his further involvement in drawing manga. If JoJo ends up being the only notable series I work on, I'm okay with that. You know how there are pottery makers who still work even after turning 90? That is something I admire. I'd like to keep writing JoJo forever. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Araki is just as much a fan of this series as anybody else. This series, this manga, has told some of my favorite stories of all time. Stories that helped me get through high school and college. Stories that continue to inspire my own work every day. And stories that I will continue to try and push onto every person that I meet. Because I think that they could change other people's lives as much as they have mine. For Christ's sake, I don't even think my YouTube channel today would have gotten to where it's at without JoJo in my life. I started out making fan content centered around this series before I branched out into what I do today. It's like I said, I owe Araki a big one for inspiring me so much. It's why I don't mind taking 3 years on and off to research, write, and edit an Iceberg video on it. The Funny Man Posing Show has actually really changed my life. And honestly, I know the guy will never see this in a million years or hear this message from wherever he's at currently. But seriously, thank you for everything, Araki. Truly, thank you. Diamond is Unbreakable is the best part of JoJo.